What was the worst pain you ever experienced and how did it happen? When I was 13 I knocked my testicles on the middle steel bar of my bike, causing one of the testicles to twist. Something that is called testicular torsion of the spermatic cord provides blood flow to the testicles. My left testicle swelled to well over the size of a tennis ball, and because I thought I had bruised my testicles I put ice on it to help the swelling, when what I should have done was go to the doctor to twist the testicle back the way it was. So I didn't see the doctor for a good 8 hours. The pain I felt I would not wish on my worst enemy. It continued for a few days after I had seen the doctor, but at that point he gave me the bad news and said that it was likely that it was going to rot away as it was too damaged. Sure enough, he was right, and for years after I still experienced a painful tightening of the spermatic cord where my testicle used to be. This was usually during peeing. I recall a follow-up visit a couple of weeks later where the doctor had to inject the biggest frickin' needle I had ever seen into my ballsack to suck out what was left of my testicle, which must have been a gooey liquid mess by that stage. The pain was unimaginable. Pulled out a piece of my eye on a dry, hard, contact lens. During a little league game, I was like 12. I was chasing after a foul ball, but I didn't get to it before it went over a chain link fence. I tried to be Mr. Cool, climbed the fence to retrieve it, and my foot, cleat, slipped. All of my weight fell on the top rail, which looks hysterical on America's Funniest Home Videos when dad slips on a log or something. But this fence had an exposed part where a metal link wasn't folded over, which pierced my scrotum, and as I lost balance and began to fall over I felt and sensed my scrotum being torn open. That's why cups are mandatory, boys and girls. Most painful and embarrassing thing that happened. One of my teammates' mom was a nurse and ran over. I remember my pants and cleats coming off and felt my actual exposed testicle briefly before I passed out. I remember the faces of the crowd of people who gathered around me. I was the talk of the school for a long time. That was some pain and a crazy scar on my scrotum. A dry bandage being pulled off a muscle. I got cut by a large piece of glass. Went for surgery consultation to the crappy hospital's referral. Dude said, yeah, no problem, easy peasy, schedule you for next week. Then he reapplied the bandages himself. We decide to go to my next consultation appointment that my aunt hooked us up with. Turned out the previous surgeon never wet the bandages on my 8-inch long massive cut on my arm. Not exaggerating. When I flexed my forearm you could see my muscle moving. So, I didn't take my painkillers yet that morning, which made it even worse. The nurse apologized every 2 seconds as she wet the part of the bandages attached to my muscle repeatedly while trying to tease the bandages off slowly. Took about 30 minutes and nearly fainted a few times. The surgeon there was P. Said they should have sutured the wound in the other night it happened. Said if I ended up needing a skin graft he'd force us to sue the hospital and would be there to testify against them. Dude was irate. Scheduled the surgery for the next day at 5 AM. Another vote for kidney stones. Up until then, it had been my burst appendix, but kidney stones trumped that easily. Stay hydrated. Ah yes. Once slammed my finger in a car door and it shut completely. Then I tried to walk away and was stuck. Pain delay. That was my 10 out of 10 pain. Until kidney stones. Then it was a 3 out of 10 pain. I broke my neck when I got crowd surfed on by a 400-pound man at a punk show. Shattered my C3-C4 vertebrae, which left pieces of my spine embedded in my spinal cord. This instantly left me a quadriplegic, though instead of having no feeling and no movement from the neck down I had no movement and hypersensitivity. I was on the ground another 1 stroke 2 songs before it was realized, which left my entire body covered in bruises. When I was finally brought to the hospital I was in so much pain. Hypersensitivity is agony. There were signs in the room not to touch me unless absolutely necessary. One time I started screaming and the doctor threw his hands up and said, "I didn't even touch you," and he looked down and his tie had brushed alongside my arm. It was like being stabbed over and over. Worst pain my life. I did mostly fully recover from this. Spent 3 months a paraplegic and 6 months a quadriplegic, but 17 years later I am doing very well. Had tonsils and adenoids removed at 18. 2 weeks after surgery, the wounds on 2 of the incisions began to hemorrhage. This went unnoticed for a few hours because I was sleeping. Once awake, I was rushed to the ER for surgery to cauterize the bleeding. Because of the prolonged hemorrhaging, I didn't have enough blood left in me to safely allow for anesthesia. Therefore, 2 orderlies held me down by each arm while the end doctor jammed an electrocutor down the back of my throat. I was in so much pain that I thought the patient next to my bed was the one trying to scream over top of what sounded like coagulated blood rising from my stomach and gurgling in my throat. The last thing I recall before passing out was the smoke from my burned flesh pouring out of my nose and mouth and rising up towards the fluorescent lights above. No ice cream for me after that. My mom took me to a salon to get a wart removed when I was in high school. They used no anesthesia and just burned it off. The process took roughly 10-15 minutes. They gave me a towel to scream into. No joke. Funny thing is that it got shut down a few years later because the store was a front for prostitution. I had a bone marrow biopsy yesterday. It sucks. A pinched nerve in my neck. I slept wrong and woke up unable to move my head from being stuck to the side without incredible pain. Had to get a muscle tranquilizer shot in the ass and a hefty load of pain meds. Gallbladder pain. Man, that was horrible. Glad it's out now. You know how percocets are crappy? Imagine one administered by a thin sheet of metal. When I was a kid I used to hold my crap in. I don't even know why, but my therapist back then said it was my way of trying to have control over something. That pathology being caused by the beatings and psychological torture dealt to me by my older brother. I would hold my crap in for up to an entire week sometimes, until I could literally feel a mass of crap bulging from my abdomen if I ran my hand over it. When I would finally crap, it wasn't watery diarrhea but a massive ball of smooth crap that looked like a stone that had been polished by a river for 100 years. Just a huge completely smooth crap ball in varying shades of brown. It would hurt so incredibly bad as it stretched my butthole that I swear to God I thought it would tear me open. The human butthole has an incredible capacity for stretching. My mom would have to sit next to me while I crap and let me squeeze her hand while I bit down on a wooden spoon or a folded up washcloth. I pushed so hard that on multiple occasions I popped blood vessels in my eyes. Those crap sessions would sometimes last an hour because it would hurt so bad that I had to stop pushing. It was like giving birth out of my butthole. Stitches without anesthetics. Happened twice. First time was when I was 5 or 6 and my brother thought it would be funny to push me into the pool. As I fell in, I slammed my chin on the edge of the pool which caused me to bite my tongue nearly off. Since it happened shortly before my parents had to go to a back to school night thing for my brother, they swung by my dentist's office with me. My dad was friends with him and got my stitches done there because it would be faster than going to the ER and it was on the way to my brother's school. It was pretty awesome eating popsicles, ice cream, and pudding for the entire week though. I remember running around my brother's back to school night with a popsicle in hand telling other kids the awesome news. Second time, ripped my big toe open at the joint of it. I was bleeding a river of blood down the front steps. It looked like a homicide scene. When my dad came back from work, he's a doctor. Since he had just gotten off work and was super hungry, he didn't want to go back to the hospital for stitches despite my mom begging him to and did the stitches in the kitchen. My mom wanted to give me booze so I could be drunk and not feel anything, but my dad didn't want to wait for it to take effect and just went right at it. The feeling of a hooked, thick needle piercing through a thick callus with no painkillers is not a feeling that is easily forgotten. I nearly blacked out from the pain. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but your parents are kind of buttholes. I had my appendix burst on a speed bump in a hospital parking lot. I was on my way to get it removed. Stubbing my big toe when I had an ingrown toenail that was also infected. Riding a bike head first into the side of a van. So I was in year 7 in school UK age 11. And as you can probably guess, I used to ride my bike when I couldn't get money for the bus. When I got to the end of a road quite close to the school, I pulled on the brakes and nothing happened. Luckily I was going quite slowly so it didn't really matter, and after a brief inspection the brakes starting working again, so I promptly removed the issue from my mind. Now my school was built on a small, yet quite steep, hill itself, so the normal entrance was at the top with the reception and Bikesh at the bottom. This meant that I had to go down a steep hill of a length I'd approximate to be 100 meters, or 110 yards, with dodgy brakes. You can probably see where this is going. As I started the descent, a white van pulled out from the reception, so I pulled on the brakes. Once again nothing happened. Obviously at this point I knew I was going to be in a world of pain no matter what I did. The hill continued beyond the reception into a brick wall. So I made the split-second decision that going into the side of the van was probably the wisest decision to make, since the further I went before I stopped the quicker I'd be going, and duly let out a yell to alert any passers-by of my plight. I don't really remember going into the side of the van, but I do remember being on the floor with an increasing dull pain on the side of my face. I was wearing a helmet that took the brunt of the force, so I didn't cave my skull in, but I was placed in a brace and forced to lie down on a stiff board for way too long. If there is any lesson to take from this, it is to always wear a helmet. It basically spilt along the right side and I shudder to think what state I would be in if that had occurred to the side of my head. The funny thing is that the time I was quite annoyed because I had no visual impairments within a day, despite being in pretty bad pain. So I couldn't go back into school with anything to show for the exercise. Henceforth I was known as that kid who rode into the side of a van. I was trying to impress my brother a couple years ago with a neat beer bottle trick he couldn't do. Unfortunately, I did it wrong and smashed the bottle in my hand, causing a 2-inch C-shaped cut in the palm of my hand. That part wasn't too painful, but I did nearly pass out on the way to infirmary with a blood-soaked kitchen cloth wrapped around my hand. I got an x-ray and showed I had a couple of pieces of glass stuck in my hand. What the nurse then did pisses me off every time I think about it. She got 2 sets of decent sized tweezers and peeled back the C-shaped cut in my hand, and with the second set started scratching around inside my hand, pulling out the glass. As I was a rugby player, I've always told myself not to complain about any pain, so I stayed quiet as this woman tortured me. That was until I got complete tunnel vision and was seconds from passing out. I let the nurse know, at which point she nonchalantly said she would get a local anesthetic to get rid of the pain. I had just endured easily the most pain I have ever been in for minutes on end, when I could have avoided it all with the injection she gave me when it was more or less over. Looking at my dog for the last time before he was put down. I broke 3 ribs in my back, then took pain pills for a few days and became massively constipated. When the time for the epic birthing came, trying to push it out with busted ribs was probably the worst pain I've ever felt. Abscessed tooth. I don't take care of it fast enough. Pain was everywhere, all over my face, and a deep pain. I couldn't sleep, eat, or think. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I'm still unsure how I got it in the first place. Having a big chunk of road rash on my back cleaned up by a nurse so it could be dressed properly. I had to lay on my front while she went at it with some kind of medical sponge. She offered gas and air, but I declined as I thought I could cope. There was about 10 minutes of real, whole body spasm type of pain, but I kept it together with a few grunts and a very firm grip on the end of the bed, and to be honest I was a bit pleased with myself for getting through it. I was very wrong. Okay, that's the edges cleaned up. Now I need to get onto the deep bit, about 1.5 to 2 times the size of my palm on my lower back. Now there's a lot of dirt embedded in here, so I'm going to have to really scrub this bit. Are you sure you don't want gas and air? I was an idiot and said no. The pain went straight from a 9 to about 16 and I lasted 15 seconds before giving in. The weird thing about gas and air is that you can still feel everything. You just don't care about it, which was a bizarre experience. It took her 20 minutes of scrubbing so hard it was rocking my whole body, and the whole of my back felt like it was on fire throughout. There was no way in heck I'd have been able to handle it without the gas. Burns. I accidentally left a pan of peanut oil on the stove and it caught fire. I couldn't get close enough to it to cover it with a damp cloth, so I used a powder fire extinguisher instead. The jet of powder caused boiling oil to blow back over me, spattering my face, my arms and dropping down onto my feet. The pain was just incredible. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital I had gas and air, which did nothing to alleviate it. At the hospital I had intravenous paracetamol, oral codeine and ibuprofen suppository all at once, which did reduce it. The burns to my arm were the worst and the scars remain, but fortunately I didn't need a skin graft as a result of very careful wound management. I hope I'll never experience pain like it again. Having a 7.62 caliber bullet tear into my arm, bounce off my bone, then go back out taking a large piece of forearm muscle with it. This past Friday, I literally found myself considering that if I shot myself in the freaking head, the pain I was in would subside. Not because I'd be dead, but because the pressure in my head would be able to escape. I dug my nails into my skull so hard, I bled. Morphine, Dilaudid, Percocet, nothing touched it. 2 hours and 2 nights in the hospital. 5 freaking days of not being able to sit in a dark, quiet room without sunglasses and earplugs. Freaking migraines, man. Had a heart attack in 2005. The pain. Have had accidents, fractures, tooth extraction, nasty injuries, but that pain, it is horrible. A severe UT. I went home feeling a bit ill and I had a sore tummy. I was quite uncomfortable and couldn't really sit still. I decided I must have had a full bladder. So I go to have a wee and the most excruciating, searing hot pain ripped through me. I was passing blood and blood clots for several hours. Definitely one of the worst pains ever. UTs are a B. I describe them as the feeling of a knife being shoved up my dong hole while I pee. That and the constant urge to pee. But when you do, only a couple bloody drops come out and that burning stinging pain happens all over again. Had a dirt bike crash where I had to turn my bike over and roll down the dirt road several times, thoroughly scratching and cutting my entire torso. Nothing serious but just tons of cuts and such. Got back home probably 4 hours later, still able to ride and all that, and my dad decided it needed cleaning. So he had me wrap a towel around my waist and proceeded to pour rubbing alcohol down my front, back and sides. I have never been so unable to hold back tears. I imagine it's the pain of being on fire, because there is just an infinite and unstoppable amount of pain of every nerve in your upper body. I was sure I was going to bite a hole through the towel I had in my mouth. You have been visited by the lemon shibby like in 3 seconds or you will never a vitamin C again. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.